when did you first hear about Gamergate?
Had been following a little bit, but I didn't really get involved until I saw the 10 articles drop at once saying gamers are dead, and I'm like, oh, those are my customers, those are my fan base. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And it just sort of felt like an attack on, them and my livelihood, really. So, I'd seen a couple of the sort of anti-consumer articles before that concerned me, but this was just this was a barrage of articles, and I didn't understand it. So I started, I heard about a few of the unfortunate stuff from the first, but it seemed like we'd really gotten past that, and we'd gotten onto the meat of the issue, which was that consumers were very upset about being treated like this. And, regardless of whether or not you feel a consumer's allegations or feelings are wrong, you have to do your due diligence and pay attention to them. I mean, there's enough of them shouting that I think if you ignore it, it's only going to become a bigger problem. And, a lot of the consumers were being stereotyped as white males. And I mean, I'm clearly not a white male. And, we had that hashtag called Not Your Shield. And it was just trying to prove to people that they really shouldn't have to prove to, that there are minority gamers, women, everybody's a gamer now. And it's sort of an injustice to claim that my consumer base is just a bunch of white dudes trying to keep people out of gaming, because that's clearly not the case now, if it ever was.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely been reading and following all of this for the past month, and I know the gist of the reasoning behind Not Your Shield. I'm not as clear on the actual name. What shield do you mean? I don't.
Well, what happened is people were, like I said, claiming that gamers were white males, and a developer named Jason Miller came out and said, you can't use me as a shield to deflect your insulting of gamers. You can't. Just because you have some minorities on your side doesn't mean that you speak for all minorities. And he was really upset that about this, and he actually spoke to the point that somebody called his job, and he lost his job over this, from just saying, hey, don't use me as a shield against other white people, basically. And it's very unfortunate that he lost his job over this, because I don't think that he's certainly not a hateful person, and he just wanted people to stop using his minority status, so to speak,
right,
as a reason to get back at other people.
So basically, you don't speak for me. I have my own opinions. This isn't
right.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I've read the original Gamers Are Dead articles and the ones that sort of spun off from that. I mean, wasn't the gist of that kind of because gaming is so ubiquitous, that so many people are into gaming, that it's not really a group anymore. It's like anyone who picks up an iPhone is a gamer. So the label gamer doesn't really mean anything anymore.
Well, the unfortunate part was a few of the articles included insults to the way people dressed at conventions, and were specifically saying that gamers didn't know how to act, and they were children, and they were racist and sexist and all. So the problem is that, well, yeah, most people play games now. They were attacking sort of what they perceived as the old version of the label with some very demeaning terms.
Right.
And I think that's honestly what got most people going. Most people are pretty accepting if you say, hey, I play games. People are like, oh, that's cool. But it's just when you say, oh, well, you're people in plush mushroom hats, attacking women, people are like, hey, wait a minute, that's not us. And I consider myself a gamer, and I don't do that. So why are you saying that? So it was a perception thing that I think maybe they got across poorly. And, just the barrage of those articles is just it does feel like an attack. Even to me, I was like, wow, what is this? It's not worded very well. And when people said, hey, this isn't worded very well, they're like, oh, stop being, I think someone quoted saying misogynerds. And it's just You know, again, using that term nerd very insultingly, and it is a nerdy hobby. Like, we're all kind of nerds these days, and more so than, you know, 20 years ago. So it just feels like almost trying to turn this into a class of people. Like, you've got the lowly gamers and nerds, and here are, you know, the people who understand true art at the top, and you're all, you know, plebs for lack of a better word. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, you know, we're all people from all different kinds of backgrounds, and whatever they feel the label is dead now, some people do feel that it's an identity and it's part of their life, and it feels like an attack.
Mm-hmm. I was following you on Twitter to do with the CNN article about Intel pulling its ads from Gamasutra, and and I agree, they got this wrong. That Anita Sarkeesian, it was her most recent video that spurred this, and I don't think that's factually correct.
No, it's not.
Yeah. I mean, when I wrote my article, I wrote that that Sarkeesian's let me think. Sarkeesian's videos are definitely a topic of discussion on Gamergate, and they're seen as part of the, I suppose, the corrupt journalist enemy, I suppose. I think that's fair to say that Anita Sarkeesian is part of what Gamergate is talking about. What do you think about that?
I don't think so much. I think it's one of those things, again, that, like, if you criticize her, she was kind of dragged into this because there were some unfortunate, like, anonymous people that were bothering her, and she was dragged into it over that, unfortunately. A lot of people even on the Gamergate side, think, you know, we do want to discuss this. There are valid points being made. We just don't like the way she's making them and the way that the media refuses to talk about the way that they're being addressed. Like, that's more the point, rather than, you know, she's part of that corrupt thing. I think it's more that if you try to talk about her points and, you know, you don't like the way that they're put across. And even I personally, like, I agree totally with dissecting games media. I want more stories. I want more diversity. But I don't like the methodology that what I don't necessarily think she's saying it directly, but it seems like it's implied that, you know, if you disagree with her, you're a misogynist. And I'm against censorship. I want her to have her opinion. I want everyone to have their opinion. I want it to be a discussion, because that's how we grow, is a discussion. But, you know, she's got comments disabled, and it forces people into the less reputable areas to talk about this, and then you're going to attract fringe people, right? So, you know, that's where we kind of get into a mess, is there's nowhere for people to discuss this kind of thing, not with her. And I understand, you know, if you're not comfortable with comments, it's for your own sanity. I understand shutting them down. I don't understand the other news sites who won't allow discussion of this, because it's kind of become a sacred cow, for lack of a better word. You can't criticize her, or you're criticizing women. And it's like, no, you know, when people criticize my games, they're not criticizing me as a woman, they're criticizing the work. And of course, there's always people saying rude things, but I don't think that's the meat of the argument against her points. I think it's people being upset with the methodology.
But you do agree that the harassment, the abuse, and the threats against her are uncalled for, of course.
Oh, absolutely. Harassment is always uncalled for. I think, you know, we've got this weird thing on social media where everybody's a public figure now, and we're all just kind of, you know, out there for people to come after, and, you know, and that's the unfortunate part. But I do think it is being used to ignore valid criticism, like, oh, these people are harassing, so therefore all gamers are harassers. And I don't think that's a fair assessment of gamers, because I've been a developer for 11 years. Everybody knows I'm a woman. I've had thousands of customers, 99% who are male, and they've never once said, hey, you're a woman and you can't do this. You're no good. It's just, I've never heard that. And, you'd think if anyone's going to hear that, it's going to be me. It's like, and, I have not always responded to legitimate criticism in the best way. Like, I've made mistakes, but, if you respond to people and say, look, hey, I made this mistake, I've done this, I don't, if any of you feel like harassing me, that's not appropriate, but I'm willing to discuss what I've done wrong or what you feel I've done wrong, and we'll work from there. But this complete shutting down of any valid criticism, it kind of stokes the fire, so to speak. And again, never, ever, ever do I condone harassment. But I do think that if we allow the valid criticism to sort of be heard, we'll kind of see a deflating of those other people because they're beside the point. They're not behaving well, and they're not worth anyone's attention. And I hope that the police handle any threats and harassment accordingly.
Do you think women who talk about games online are more subject to abuse and harassment than men who do so?
I'm not sure, because I've seen the Call of Duty developers, all they did was tweak a gun, and that guy got like hundreds of death threats sent to his house. I think we do have a tendency to focus on it when it happens to women more. I do think that when it happens to women, people use certain words that are more scary, I think, especially when you're a woman. It's more scary to get certain types of threats. I don't necessarily think it happens more. I think it's in the way that it happens that it makes it feel worse. I do think when you speak a certain way about games, people feel it's inflammatory, and I do think we need to be considerate that we're saying things about things people are very passionate about, and it's a huge market. I mean, we're talking about 1.2 billion people. We can't expect there to never be someone who is not nice and not kind. And I think that the best way to handle it is to just let the police handle it. Send it off. Don't be afraid to report it when it happens. That's the only way we're going to get past it. When people are just reposting the harassment and just saying, like, look at these people, you're only giving attention to people who are like, wow, I've been validated for harassing you, so I'm going to do it again and again and again. Like, even the RCMP will tell you, like, do not repost the harassment, because you're giving these people a reason to do it, and you're drowning out people who actually want to talk to you and engage with you and make gaming a better place.
I saw your point. You were talking back and forth about policing an anonymous group, that
right.
You can't really, people will use the hashtag, of course, and in any way they want, and so not one person doesn't speak for the entire group.
Right.
But do you think that, say, like Adam Baldwin, you can legitimately say he speaks for Gamergate?
I don't think he speaks for Gamergate. He was one of the people that started for it, and like a lot of people have said, look, we don't agree with Adam Baldwin's politics. We don't agree with his views on this, and even it's funny because even if he does something, or say Milo does something that people don't like, they will call them out on it. They'll say, hey, we don't like this. If you are going to try and represent us, you cannot be doing this. So it's interesting that even the public figures on our side, people will call them out, which is amazing, because I don't often see that from the other side. People say, hey, don't engage in that behavior. Like, nobody is calling people out on saying gamers are dead. On that side, they're like, yeah, they are. And I'm like, well, you've got to understand that upsets people. So I guess I would like to see some of that over there too.
I actually did see people, because Adam Baldwin linked to my article, and I did actually see people calling him out for mocking Canadians. And what was the other thing? For retweeting something that I said, but altering it, like corrected tweet, CT, and saying, that's not cool. You can't just say that somebody said something when they didn't. So I've seen that happen. One thing that my previous interview mentioned was that when people criticize games, gamers take it personally. They take it as an attack on them. So when Anita Sarkeesian or another critic points out something that she thinks is sexist in a game, gamers think she's calling us sexist for playing this game. Do you think that's true?
I think that there are some things that are said that sort of imply that. I don't, like I said, I don't think she said it directly. She said it herself, we're not all huddling together trying to make sexist games, or, and gamers are not huddling all together to be sexist. But she does seem to think that the solution to sexism in games is for developers to come together and not make games that, in her mind, she does believe that games have a real world impact on sexism. So it's hard not to infer from that she means that. And whether or not people are right, it is kind of on the critic to say, well, no, I don't mean that you're sexist. I mean that, I'm concerned about this. And there's never an addressing of people. Like, she never addresses people directly. She won't discuss. She's been invited on shows. She's been with some very fair people. Like, I know the YouTuber Monday Matt has offered to talk to her. He said, look, let's have a conversation. And she just completely ignores people who want to talk to her. And I understand that, maybe she's afraid, but it gets to a point where it's like, well, you're not letting us talk to you and express our concerns as gamers, because the only way you're going to have cooperation is to get the consumer base on your side and say, hey, yeah, this is interesting. I would like to see more stories. And most people are saying, I would like to see more stories. I just don't want the current stories taken away, because this person is implying that there's a greater social implication when we don't have the science to prove that yet. So it does kind of come off as a smear against gamers when you say things like that.
She has criticized science fiction TV and movies and things like that. And there's lots of critics and academics who, analyze movies and analyze TV shows and say, this is sexist on Survivor, or, this is sexist in action movies. But they don't get the same reaction that she gets when she talks about games. I mean, do you think that analyzing games in that way is different somehow?
I do think that there's a difference in how the methodology is applied. Like, I've never heard a critic say, well, Survivor is sexist, therefore people who watch it are going to become more sexist. Like, I haven't heard that kind of argument, but I do sort of hear that from Sarkeesian and people similar to her. And I've heard other people dissect games. Like, there's Game Theory, there are many YouTube channels, there's Kite Tales. They all talk about video games, and Jade Fox talks about video games. There are lots of women who talk about video games and say, I don't like this, I like this. It's when you start bringing in science that doesn't exist and saying, this needs to stop because it's causing people to react in real life. She literally says, the less that you realize media is affecting you, the more it actually is. And the study she's pulling from, it doesn't actually say that. So there is sort of there's a dishonest representation of how video games affect us. And people feel like it's the Jack Thompson thing all over again, only this time we're not taking it to the Supreme Court and having them sort it out. It's just kind of coming to this shaming and, if game developers want women treated well, they've got to do this or that. And it's just, even though they're not advocating censorship, it feels like censorship. And I think that's what a lot of people, developers and gamers, take exception to. We,
on one of the CBC radio shows here, called The Current. They talk to female game developers and designers, and they ask them about incidents at work where they felt like, I'm being singled out because I'm a woman. Do you think that has happened to you?
No, I've rarely encountered any issues. I don't know, maybe it's just because I put my foot down immediately if I even think it's going that way. I'm like, listen, you know, if this conversation is going to go down this route, we're going to have to part ways. And this is not to say that anyone is doing anything wrong. It's just to say that I find that being assertive in the workplace and being assertive with my contracts, it really does help. And that's hard for a lot of people. It's hard for men as it is for women. And I mean, when you feel like you're the only one in the room, because let's face it, I mean, there is a lot of fear-mongering. We're coming into this believing that men already don't want us here. So when something happens, you know, it's amplified by that fact. I've heard stories, and I've heard stories that are the complete opposite by women who have never experienced anything. Like myself, I've barely heard 2 words about me being a woman in 11 years. And I mean, I've worked on lots of games. I've worked with tons of developers. And it's not to demean anyone's experiences. I just think the experience is so varied that we can't really say that this is a systemic problem. But again, there are so many people in the world. It's like there are going to be some jerks, and they need to be rooted out. And they need to be rooted out by us being assertive and speaking up as it happens, keeping evidence when it happens, because that's a big thing. Is people are afraid to be like, I got to get proof, and I got to show people this. Because for whatever reason, they just don't, we don't think of it at the time. It just kind of happens sometimes, and then you're taken off guard. So I think that we've got to be vigilant about it to make sure that it doesn't become a widespread problem. And we have to be vigilant about not making women scared to become game developers. Say, okay, this person did something bad to you. Don't let that happen, and don't let it stop you from making games, because that's the worst thing.